The Deep Dive, the show where we take a whole stack of sources, research, articles, and a lot of real-world intel and give you the full story. And today, our subject is this global titan, a massive gatekeeper, and honestly, a source of incredible stress for millions of people. We're talking about the TOEFL.
We are jumping right into the TOEFL ecosystem. That's the test of English as a foreign language. And, for non-native English speakers, a good score here. It isn't just a nice to have.
Not at all.
It's the key. It's the credential you need for top universities, for professional licenses in things like medicine, pharmacy. I mean, the barrier to entry is just immense.
Exactly. And those high stakes, they just define the anxiety around it. So our deep dive today, it isn't just about, learning vocabulary. We've got a dual focus here from our source stack.
Right.
First, we have the academic research that really pinpoints the core learning challenges students have. And second, we have this huge amount of crucial and often really angry feedback from test takers themselves.
Detailing the chaos.
Yeah, detailing the systemic administrative problems, the technical fails, the things that turn test day into a complete gamble.
So our mission today is to kind of synthesize those two big challenges. We want to look at everything from, the sheer cognitive difficulty of the listening section all the way to the unstable, frustrating world of remote testing.
And we want to go beyond just saying, it's hard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We want to deliver some actual insights into how students are learning to navigate all this, to manage the risks, and ultimately how the smartest prep is really about hacking the predictable structure of the test itself.
Okay, let's get into it. Section 1. We're starting with the academic hurdles, the things that trip up even really, really good English speakers. And we have to begin with what the research flags over and over again as the #1 problem for so many students: the listening barrier.
The data is, well, it's pretty clear. Listening comprehension is consistently flagged as the hardest section for a really significant portion of TOEFL students.
And it's not just about hearing the words, is it?
Not at all. It's about simultaneous processing. I mean, you have to decode the language, grasp the academic subject, follow the argument structure, filter out junk, and you have to do it all at a really fast pace, and you can't hit rewind.
Right. And our sources really break down why this section is such a wall for people. It's a mix of things. Linguistic, cultural, even cognitive friction. You've got the fast speaking pace. That's just the baseline.
But then you layer on top of that the different English dialects, and this can be a real shock.
Yeah, that's where the cultural part comes in.
It is. Students, they prep by listening to what they think is standard American academic English, but the test pulls from a much wider pool. There's this one study, and it specifically mentioned how students might hear not just U.S. or U.K. accents, but completely unexpected ones.
Like the Irish accent story.
Exactly. We found an anecdote from a test taker who was just floored. They were expecting a standard lecture, and suddenly they're hit with a strong Irish accent, delivering this dense academic material. And that variability, it forces this instant mental adjustment that just drains your focus.
That makes so much sense. If you've trained your ear for one specific rhythm and suddenly the vowels and the cadence completely change, I mean, from California to Dublin, it could completely derail you, even if you know every single word they're saying.
Precisely. And then there's the third piece, which might be the most critical, and that's the dense nature of the content. This is not a chat at a coffee shop.
No.
This is advanced academic discourse. We're talking about long, specialized university lectures on things like the orbital mechanics of asteroids or the chemical structure of fungal spores or these really complex theories about the Bronze Age collapse.
So if you're already struggling with the speed and the accent, and then you have to process material that's totally alien to you, say you're an arts major, and you suddenly get hit with a 5-minute lecture on complex physics, that just creates a mental block.
That's the core finding when you dig into the non-linguistic factors. It's not just about your English level. A student's success is so heavily tied to their own perspective, their past experiences. If a topic is just boring or confusing to you, or you already have anxiety around science, that cognitive drag just kills your focus.
Yeah.
You stop trying to understand the argument and you just start hunting for keywords.
Okay, so that's the challenge, but this is also where the strategy starts to emerge. If the problem is adaptability and focus, how do you train for that?
Well, this explains why just doing practice test after practice test, it often doesn't work. You hit a wall.
Because you're not training your ear for variety, you're just memorizing the question format.
You've got it. The approach that really works, the one highlighted in the sources, is all about systematic practice to build a stronger hearing awareness.
So what does that look like in practice? It's not just like binge watching Netflix, is it?
No, it's much more targeted. The students who show the best adaptive skills are the ones who are consistently listening to real-world, high-density, academic-style content. So, specialized podcasts, apps with variable speed lectures. They're consciously seeking out diverse English.
So they're training their brain to handle that specific genre.
Exactly. Academic delivery, with its own signal phrases and structures. And that consistency, it builds a kind of immunity. They stop being surprised by the pace or the topic.
That pressure really brings us to the next point, the integrated task trap in speaking and writing. These tasks seem simple, but they're a whole different beast.
It's a classic cognitive load problem. I mean, think about it. You're reading a dense text, and you're listening to a lecture that's usually arguing against it. You're taking notes on both, and then you have to synthesize it all into a coherent response, spoken or written under a crazy time limit.
And the number one mistake, the one that just sinks people, is confusing explaining with reporting.
Absolutely. Students feel this need to show off their knowledge, right? So they add their own opinions, background context, or they try to explain the science behind it. But the task is laser-focused. You are only supposed to report on how the two sources connect.
Does the lecture contradict the reading? Does it support it? That's it.
That's it. Any extra explanation is just a time sink, and it often means you run out of time before you've even finished the main reporting task.
So, given that stress, what's the actionable tip? How do you fight that tendency to over-explain?
The number one strategy is to master a fixed template and stick to it religiously. This is the definition of hacking the test's structure.
A scaffold.
A mental scaffold, exactly. Something like, the reading passage states that X. The professor in the lecture challenges this by arguing. By using rigid structure like that, you take the organizational burden off your brain. You can just focus 100% on getting the content in there and hitting all the required points.
So it's less about creativity and more about just being reliable under extreme pressure. It's a safety net.
It is. It's for the person who needs to score high by being incredibly efficient and clear, not by being, a poetic writer.
Let's circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the subject matter anxiety. It really sounds like the test is biased towards certain fields like science and history.
It's a huge friction point. You see this feedback everywhere. The test claims it's assessing comprehension, not your prior knowledge, but the medium itself, this 5-minute lecture on, ancient Roman coins, it demands intense engagement. And if a student has zero interest in that,
their mind just wanders.
Completely. The focus collapses.
Yeah.
And their score suffers not because they can't speak English, but because the content was either too overwhelming or just too dry to hold their attention.
So the test is really measuring your ability to stay hyper-focused on dense, unfamiliar material.
That's the insight, yeah. It suggests a flaw in the assessment itself.
Yeah.
You drift off for 30 seconds because the physics concepts are too much, you lose the whole argument, and your score tanks, regardless of your grammar.
Yeah.
So a big part of prep becomes forcing yourself to listen to the driest academic stuff you can find.
Okay, that shift from academic problems to, well, pure chaos, it really mirrors the student experience. Which brings us to section 2. We're moving from the cognitive world to the incredibly fragile digital world of the home edition.
The TOEFL IBT home edition.
Right.
It was rolled out as this great accessible option, especially during the pandemic, convenience, comfort, all that.
Right.
In reality, for so many people, it just introduced this profound technical friction and uncertainty.
Yeah.
The sources paint a picture of a test that's less about your English and more about whether you can meet this unstable, super demanding technical spec.
The whole burden is shifted onto the student.
The whole thing. Perfect internet, a flawlessly optimized computer, a sterile room, it all falls on you. And that's leading to these high-stakes catastrophic failures.
So let's start with the first failure, the myth of the equipment check. People run this check, they get a green light 48 hours before, and then on test day, the whole thing just collapses. Why?
Because the pre-check tool is fatally flawed. It's too superficial. It checks your camera, your mic, basic internet. It absolutely does not simulate the heavy system load of the actual test. When the real test launches, the secure browser starts doing all these things at once. High-def screen sharing, live video streaming to the proctor, all these security scripts running in the background, plus the test application itself.
And that leads directly to that failure mode you mentioned, CPU saturation.
Exactly. This is everywhere, especially on machines with 8 gigs of RAM, which is still standard for a lot of modern laptops, including newer Macs. The secure browser's demands just spike the CPU load, often to 100%.
Wow.
And then the computer becomes unresponsive. The video lags. And the proctoring software sees that lag and thinks you're trying to cheat, so it just terminates the test.
The technical workarounds people attempt are they're incredible. You have students who should be thinking about English syntax, and instead they're basically becoming IT professionals. Tell us about that pseudo-purge command again.
It just shows the desperation. Sudo purge is a really technical command on a Mac. You use it in the terminal to force the system to clear out its inactive memory, trying to free up every single byte of RAM you can.
So a student is doing this high-level, risky system procedure right before the test.
Yes, hoping it will stabilize the fragile environment enough to prevent a crash. This has nothing to do with assessing English. It just shows you the level of instability they're fighting against.
That is terrifying because if they type that command wrong, they could just crash their own session anyway. But the failure that seems to come up again and again is the Unify browser bottleneck.
This is the one you see everywhere. It's this recurring catastrophic failure. The session terminates right after the most crucial step, recording the statement of academic honesty.
So you record the statement, you hit submit, and then nothing.
You get a gray loading screen, and then a message saying your test has been terminated due to security reasons.
So what's actually happening there technically?
It strongly suggests a failure on the server side. The client, your computer, sends the recording, but then the server fails to get the right security handshake to launch the rest of the test. And since it can't confirm the security protocol is working, it just defaults to the safest option for them, which is to kill the test.
And the student is just left staring at a gray screen, locked out and out of pocket for the test fee.
And then, when that crisis hits, the human element, the proctors, often makes it so much worse.
This is the proctoring and communication failures.
It turns a crisis into a total nightmare. A lot of the proctors, they're there for security, but they just don't have the technical knowledge to diagnose a CPU saturation issue or a network sync error. So their default response is just blame shifting.
They just blame the student's computer.
Immediately. It's your hardware, it's your internet, it's your keyboard, even when the system was working perfectly just minutes before in a distant application.
And it's not just ignorance. It's sometimes actively bad advice. We saw those instances of incorrect instructions.
We saw some alarming ones. One proctor told a student to go into the Windows Task Manager and start killing critical system processes to free up memory.
Which is a great way to cause a system crash.
It's almost guaranteed to. Another student was given a support link for the GRE, which is a totally different test, wasting precious time. And maybe the worst one was a proctor who forced a student to continue into the speaking section even after their microphone had clearly failed the audio check.
Just setting them up to fail.
Completely. And then you have this weird contradiction about the forbidden headset.
Right. The rules say no headsets because you could hide a listening device.
The rules are very clear. No headsets. You have to use your internal speaker and mic. But the test software itself, the application you download, still has prompts telling you to put on your headset.
That's a trap.
It's a total booby trap for anyone who doesn't know better. And it just shows this incredible lack of quality control, that this score-invalidating instruction is still hard-coded into the application.
So the system is just designed to flag anything that looks slightly off. Let's talk about those security flags and false positives.
The secure browser it's paranoid. Any background process that interacts with the user interface, even if it's harmless, can trigger termination.
Like a battery warning pop-up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or a temporary toolbar for a different language input. And crucially, it also flags unlicensed operating systems. We saw one case where a student, trying to create a perfectly clean environment, installed a fresh but cracked version of Windows 11.
And the test just shut down.
Almost immediately. Unauthorized software. The system is probably checking for legitimate license keys in the registry, and if it finds anything off, it kills the session. Doesn't care if you're actually cheating.
So it's hypersensitive and completely unforgiving.
It sacrifices fairness for security, and it catches so many innocent users in the crossfire.
And the end result of all this technical chaos is the incredible financial consequence. Tell us that story about the candidate who ended up spending over $1,000.
This one anecdote just sums it all up. This candidate tried the home edition twice. Both times it terminated. CPU saturation, the browser bottleneck, the usual suspect.
Despite having a modern computer and good internet.
So they got frustrated. They were under deadlines, so they just gave up on the home edition. They booked a flight and a hotel to take the test in person at a center in a neighboring country.
So adding up the 3 test fees, the late fees, the travel?
Their total cost was over $1,150.
Over $1,000 just because the remote technology was so unreliable. That's a huge financial risk.
It's a massive burden. It really turns the TOEFL into an access issue. Success in the home edition starts to look like a form of technical privilege. Do you have the high-end computer and the money to absorb multiple failed attempts?
Which leads us right into the next section. The trust deficit that comes from what happens after the test. The grading, the cancellations, all of it.
Right. The technical problems are one thing, but the administrative processes that follow. They feel so arbitrary and opaque. That's where you get this systemic trust deficit. Let's start with inconsistent grading, especially in speaking and writing.
This is where you see what you called the paradox of performance.
Exactly. It's just illogical from the candidate's perspective. We looked at feedback from a native English speaker who took the test 3 times, back to back. On one attempt, they felt their speaking section was a disaster.
Right, they ran out of time on 2 tasks, paused for like 5 or 6 seconds on another.
They thought they had bombed it. They were expecting a 25, tops.
Then they got
a perfect 30 out of 30.
Wow.
Then a few days later, on an attempt they felt was flawless, perfectly delivered, great structure, they scored a 28. And their rating scores were jumping around too. A 4-point difference between a 25 and a 29 on essays that use the exact same template.
That is just baffling. If a perfect score comes from a performance that was objectively bad, it feels like the grading algorithm is looking for something other than what we think of as good communication.
The speculation is that the AI grader, the SpeechRater, it prioritizes consistency over everything else, over content, over natural fluency. If you maintain a fixed, predictable structure and you hit certain linguistic markers, transition words, complete sentences, the AI might score you high on discourse coherence, and that just overrides the fact that you paused for 6 seconds.
So on their best attempt, they might have used a slightly more complex sentence that the algorithm saw as an error, and that docked them points.
It's very possible. The system rewards what's machine readable, not necessarily what's holistically good. And that randomness, it just breeds distrust. It feels like a lottery.
Like you're just rolling the dice every time you pay the fee.
Exactly. And that feeling is only made worse by the wrongful cancellation experience.
This is when the black box really slams shut. Your score just disappears weeks later, and what's the reason they give?
The standard line is that your responses contained language, ideas, and examples found in other test taker responses or from published sources.
So, plagiarism.
Essentially, yeah. And this often happens to people who are native speakers or who used very common, well-known prep templates, and they are adamant they did not cheat.
So the suspicion is that the automated plagiarism detector is just way too aggressive.
It seems highly credible. I mean, think about it. If you have a template for talking about fast food, thousands of people are going to use McDonald's or KFC as an example.
Right, it's common knowledge.
But an algorithm just sees that shared language and flags it as potential collusion, leading to cancellation. It can't tell the difference between common language and actual cheating.
And if you get canceled, you enter the appeal nightmare. What's that process like?
It's designed to make you give up. When you ask for the evidence they used against you, they refuse to show it. They cite security reasons.
So the burden of proof is on you to prove you didn't cheat, but you can't see the evidence you're supposed to be refuting.
It's an impossible situation. I remember you pointing out that one story where the family had to basically go to war with the administration.
Yeah, that was shocking.
According to that person, who did eventually get their score back, the only way to win was just incessant calling, administrative harassing. Their family members took turns calling ETS supervisors every single day, demanding a human review of the file.
And it worked.
It took weeks of constant pressure, but eventually a supervisor caved and overrode the automated cancellation. But imagine the emotional torture of that, especially with a deadline looming.
That opaqueness also shows up in the administrative review trap, when scores just get delayed.
This is a constant threat, especially with the home edition. ETS says a review takes 2 to 4 weeks, but it often goes longer, and candidates just describe it as torture. And these reviews get triggered by the tiniest things.
Like moving your lips while you read.
Exactly. The proctoring software sees that and thinks you might be whispering answers. Or you move away from the screen for a second. Or your internet drops for a moment. Any of these can flag your test for review.
And the real stress comes from the timing of these delays.
Absolutely. High-stakes timing. That's the whole problem. These delays always seem to happen right before a huge university application deadline, say January 19th. If your score goes into review on January 5th, your whole application cycle could be derailed. You could lose an entire year.
So what's the strategy? What's the buffer you need to build in?
The consensus from students who've been through it is clear. Book your test at least 3 weeks before any hard deadline. No exceptions. That gives you the buffer to absorb a potential review. And you have to be proactive. The minute you see that review notice, you call the universities and ask for an extension. Waiting is not a strategy.
With the system being this uncertain, both technically and administratively, it really makes you question the whole business model behind it. Which brings us to Section 4, the economics of high-stakes credentialing.
You have to look at the financial burden here. The base fees are already high. They range from, about $185 to over $300, depending on the country.
Which, for a student in a developing country, that can be a huge amount of money.
It can be a massive portion of a family's monthly income. And that's just the starting point. The system then layers on all these extra fees that feel punitive.
Like the late registration and rescheduling fees?
Exactly. $49 for registering late, $69 to reschedule. And if you have to retake the test several times, maybe because of a technical failure, those costs just multiply. You could spend hundreds of dollars and have no usable score to show for it.
But the one thing that seems to generate the most outrage is the Score Report Profit Center. Sending your score to additional schools now costs $29 each.
This fee is almost universally seen as pure profit. Or, as one student put it, looting poor students. And the logic is simple, right? The actual cost for ETS to send a score digitally to a university's database is...
What?
Pennies.
It's basically zero.
It's negligible. But they charge $29 per school after your first few free ones. So it becomes a tax on ambition. If you're applying to 10 or 15 schools to maximize your chances, you're suddenly paying hundreds of dollars just on score reports.
On top of the test fees, on top of the application fees.
And in some places, like India, they add an 18% sales tax on top of that. So sending one score report costs over 2,000 rupees. The compounding effect really drives this feeling that the organization is just exploiting its gatekeeper status.
So this financial risk puts people in a terrible position. Do you gamble on the unstable home edition, or do you face the physical test center trade-off?
The test center has one huge advantage: stability. You get rid of all the home edition tech risks, no CPU crashes, no browser bottlenecks, and far fewer of those little actions that trigger an administrative review.
But you trade the technical risk for what you call environmental noise toxicity. What is it actually like inside a test center?
It can be chaos. The start times are staggered, so people are coming in and starting at different times. This means while you might be in the middle of your super focus-intensive reading or listening section,
the person next to you is starting their speaking section.
Exactly. And they're shouting their answers into their microphone just a few feet away from you.
I can't imagine. You're trying to follow a dense lecture on astrophysics, and someone next to you is loudly arguing about the benefits of public transportation.
It completely shatters your concentration. And the headphones they provide are often old, with very little noise cancellation, so the noise just floods the room.
So how do people cope? What are the strategies for dealing with that noise?
They resort to some pretty extreme measures. One strategy is to just crank the volume on the listening section up to a painfully loud level just to drown everything else out.
Wow.
Another one's more tactical. People try to be the very first person in line to start the test. The goal is to get through your reading and listening sections before the room fills up and the shouting starts.
And people even practice for this, right? Building environmental immunity.
Yes, it's a critical psychological tool. Candidates told us they actively practice in loud places, like a busy coffee shop, or they'll play loud music while they do practice drills at home. They're not just preparing for the questions. They're preparing to survive the acoustic disruption.
So success becomes a measure of your concentration stamina as much as your English ability.
It really does. It's all about preparing for the conditions, not just the content.
Okay, we've covered the difficulty, the tech friction, the administrative chaos. Let's pivot now to the solutions. How do students actually get past just surviving and start to really succeed? This takes us to Section 5, Mastering the Test's Hidden Logic.
The key to a really high score is understanding this idea of the hackable exam. This concept, and it's backed up by AI analysis of standardized tests like the GMAT and TOEFL, is that these tests have to rely on predictable, repeatable patterns.
Because they have to be standardized.
Exactly. So if you can recognize the structure, the underlying logic, you can kind of bypass the need to be a perfect expert on the content.
So it's less a test of knowledge and more a test of pattern recognition.
That's a great way to put it. The test makers have to put the answers in logically predictable places. The whole thing is like a script that you can learn to read.
So let's get specific. Reading section pattern recognition. How does that work? How do you use it to manage time?
The AI models show that answers are located in very specific places relative to the keywords in the question. So for a factual detail question, the answer is almost always within 2 lines of where that keyword appears in the passage.
So you don't read the whole paragraph. You find the keyword, you scan right around it. That's a huge time saver.
It is. But it gets even more interesting with inference questions, the ones that ask you to do something.
Right.
The answers to those are usually hidden in subordinate or contrast clauses, sentences that start with words like although, however, despite. Those phrases signal that the implied meaning, the thing the question is asking about, is right there.
So you're reading the grammar of the test, not just the content. And that's critical for fixing the biggest problem in reading, which is time management.
Time is the enemy. The classic mistake is spending 22 minutes on the first reading passage because you feel like you have to understand every single word.
And that just forces you to rush the next sections, which is where you make all the mistakes.
Exactly. The discipline strategy is all about efficiency. You read just the first and last sentence of each paragraph to get the main idea. Then you only dive into the details to answer a specific question. And crucially, you stick to a rigid 18-minute limit per section. When the clock hits 18, you are done, and you move on, no matter what.
Let's do a deep dive now on the speaking section, specifically aiming for that magic score of 26. Why is 26 so important?
26 is the gatekeeper score. It's the number required for professional licensing in fields like medicine, nursing, pharmacy. You have to get a 26. And to do that, you need near-perfect consistency. You can't just get lucky.
And the first step is to avoid what you call the TOEFL casino approach.
The casino approach is just passive repetition. You take a practice test, you get a 24. You take another, you get a 25. You just keep taking them, hoping you hit the jackpot.
Without actually analyzing what went wrong.
Right. Mastery requires deliberate, feedback-rich practice. You have to be in a constant cycle of feedback, correction, reattempt. You have to focus on what went wrong structurally, not just what words you used.
And a huge part of that is understanding you're being graded by an AI, the SpeechRater. So you have to be scoring beyond the total number.
Absolutely. Stop obsessing over a tiny decimal change in your score. The score is just the output. You have to focus on the inputs, the actual SpeechRater dimensions. Discourse coherence, grammar usage, vocabulary diversity. Those are the levers you can actually pull.
So if your discourse coherence score is low, it doesn't matter how many fancy vocabulary words you use. You have to fix the structure.
You're just wasting your time otherwise. You have to reverse engineer the assessment. And finally, you have to nail the technical delivery. You can be a great English speaker and still lose points here.
So what are the key technical things the AI is listening for?
Number 1 is speaking rate. The algorithm hates speech that's too slow. It thinks you're hesitating. The target is about 2.5 to 2.8 words per second, or around 150 to 160 words per minute. That cadence signals fluency to the machine.
And you have to kill the ums and ahs.
Those are fluency killers.
Yeah.
The AI hears filler words and just penalizes you heavily. So you need clean audio equipment. A good external mic is way better than a laptop mic. And you need to do specific drills just to practice speaking without pauses.
And what about which tasks to focus on?
A lot of people spend all their time on task 1 because it's predictable. But the integrated tasks 2 and 4, where you have to synthesize the reading and listening, they make up 2/3 of your score.
Yeah.
If you only ace task 1, you will never, ever get to 26. You have to master the integrated tasks.
This whole deep dive has been just a really comprehensive look at this entire ecosystem. It's so clear that success is about so much more than just language skill. It's about technical resilience, financial planning, and just understanding the game.
If we were to summarize the key takeaways, I think the main finding is pretty stark. Success on the TOEFL right now is just as much about managing risk, choosing a physical test center over the unstable home edition, building in huge buffers for score delays, as it is about your actual English mastery.
And the market is definitely responding to that. We're seeing this clear market shift. The incredible growth of other tests like the Duolingo English Test or PTE, it's being driven by students who are choosing stability, speed, and fairness over the TOEFL brand name, which suggests that the legacy test makers are facing a really significant trust deficit.
They are. The challenge for them is huge. They have to figure out how to balance their obsession with security with a humane, stable, and transparent experience for the test taker. Because if the experience is this full of friction, it undermines the whole point of the test, which is supposed to be about measuring English.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to think about. When test prep becomes all about hacking the exam, using fixed templates, scanning for patterns, just surviving a logistical nightmare, and success is so often tied to having the technical and financial privilege to absorb multiple failures, what is actually being measured here? Is the TOEFL testing English proficiency, or is it just testing your proficiency at surviving the testing system itself?